All right, guys. So as many of you may know, recently there's been a vibe shift of sorts within the world of comedy, where just last year the type of comedian that was really popular, that everyone really liked, was like the anti-woke Rogansphere type of comedian. So obviously Joe Rogan, but also people like Bert Kreischer, Andrew Schultz, Tom Segura, Theo Von and all those people. And recently there's been a vibe shift because it's so transparently obvious just how ideologically captured they have become, or how griftery they've become. Like, one of the things that people like about comedy is that it is very countercultural. It is very it's kind of like an observer from the outside of the political and cultural conversations that are going on, and they just kind of like rip into both sides. They make fun of it, and the whole point is just kind of like, stick a middle finger to the man, or the government, or whatever it is. But the idea is that a lot of people really like comedy because it kind of gives people an outlet to say what it is that they want to say, but not in a PC way, right? Like, there's something so much more gratifying about hearing Bill Burr just go off against these corrupt billionaires versus, listening to someone who has a suit and tie on, who's still essentially saying kind of the same things, but it just doesn't hit as well. It's kind of like, it's the chaotic good versus the lawful good. Sometimes it's just a lot more effective to go with the chaotic good. But when you start to see these comedians cozy up to these politicians, and I mean, they're ultimately becoming the very thing that they allegedly claimed they wanted to destroy at the beginning. Joe Rogan is mainstream now. Theo Von is mainstream now. They're having all these politicians on, like Theo Von's having JD Vance on, Joe Rogan's having, President Trump on. I mean, it's insane because they're so obviously political puppets. They are nothing more than political puppets. As much as Andrew Schultz would like to just try to exonerate himself of any level of responsibility for platforming Donald Trump and making him seem like a really cool broski guy, might as well just vote for him because he also likes the things that I like, and he seems like a down-to-earth guy in this interview, without really understanding any of his policies or seeing how crazy destructive his policies would end up becoming. No, you just put him on Theo Von, put him on Joe Rogan, put him on all these podcasts that a bunch of meatheads listen to, because they're going to be duped into thinking that these people are a lot more down to earth than the crazy evil democratic billionaires, right? It's obvious what's happening. Everyone sees it, especially since we're living in a world in which it's a lot more, I guess, anti-mainstream to make fun of the anti-woke crowd than it is to make fun of the woke crowd. Like, wokeness is not mainstream anymore. It hasn't been for some time now. What's mainstream is anti-wokeness. And so if you want to talk about countercultural stuff, then the countercultural position would be to make fun of the anti-wokes. And you are starting to see more and more comedians speaking out against this or talking about it. You saw recently Andrew Santino kind of bring up and lament the fact that comedians are starting to be viewed as a source for news for whatever reason. And then you also have Anthony Jeselnik, who Anthony Jeselnik's actually been on a tirade against anti-woke comedians for years now. So that's not new, but him talking about this is still making headlines, and I think rightfully so. Again, we're not just talking about comedians who have a particular political viewpoint. If you want to be a comedian and right wing, that's fine. That's not an issue. The problem is when comedians are actually platforming politicians, giving credence to everything that they have to say, coming across as if they're a good source of news where you can get an idea, watch this video, watch this interview, and get a realistic idea of who the other person is, and get no pushback at all from any of the comedians. Like, the Trump administration knows exactly what they're doing. They know what they're doing. Yes, go send JD Vance to be on Theo Von's show. What is Theo Von going to ask him, right? There's no... They're just fluff pieces, and they're being used to give fluff pieces to these crazy, powerful politicians. And yeah, so it's good that you see people like Bill Burr call this out, Anthony Jeselnik called this out, Marc Maron calling this out. I'm glad that this is becoming more and more of a thing in people's eyes. Like, it should matter. You shouldn't have comedians interviewing Donald Trump. You shouldn't have comedians interviewing JD Vance. It's crazy. And there have been a lot of YouTube channels that have been discussing this. People like Too Lazy to Try and Podcast Cringe and a bunch of others. I haven't seen this clip circulating though, and I did want to go over it because it is, it's essentially Marc Maron against Howie Mandel regarding comedy, regarding wokeness, and regarding what type of jokes you should be expecting from comedians. And I do have some disagreements with Marc Maron in general. I do disagree with some things that he says. Overall, I think he's correct in going against these anti-woke comics. But anyways, yeah, I just want to go over this video and we'll see here.
I've been seeing like Jeselnik having an issue with people like Tony Hinchcliffe, who he's saying uses profanity or just shock value comedy. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, at this point, it's lazy and sloppy and hackneyed. To be in a fucking club where, I walking down the hall at the comedy club, at the Comedy Store, and, in one room, someone's doing their bit about trans people, and then I get down the hall and there's someone on stage going, well, I guess I got to do my bit about trans people. Like, no, you don't. You don't. It's hack now.
Like, this is a good point. I do think that in terms of comedy, in terms of what jokes should be allowed, like, if it's comedy, if it's a joke, it should all be okay. I genuinely believe that, and I'm not going to go in depth regarding my philosophy on comedy, but I legitimately believe that so long as if it's just a joke, it's not meant to actually hurt anybody, then I think it's perfectly fine. If you're like skipping through channels and you come across a comedian who's saying a lot of offensive jokes, right? Topics that you really don't like to hear about, it's perfectly fine. I don't like the people who say that, you stop being so easily offended. I hate those people. Everyone's offended by something. Offense isn't a big deal. It's just how you react towards that offense, right? If you're offended by something, that's not inherently a bad thing. You should be offended by a lot of things in life. You should be. Offense should be a feeling that you feel. However, it's how you react to that sensation of offense that really matters. So shouting down comics and telling them to, get off the stage, stupid reaction towards you being offended, right? You walking away and saying that humor's not for me, it's good, right? It's fine that you're offended, not an issue. Everyone's offended. But just, walk away. Other people might not be offended by those jokes, and that's fine too. So I do disagree in that regard. However, I do agree that, again, the vibe shift has changed, especially within comics. And so everyone is just making jokes against the woke. Everyone, right? I couldn't even finish Ricky Gervais's, they're going to talk about Ricky right now, but I did watch Ricky Gervais's, not most recent special, but the special before that, and I almost couldn't finish it just because all the jokes were the same. They're jokes that I heard on Twitter. They're not clever. They're just boring, kind of, honestly, they're borderline political slogans. And that's coming from someone that I like Ricky Gervais. I like him. I think he's funny. I like his shows. I didn't really like that stand-up special that I watched, and I'm not too crazy about watching the most recent one either. But by and large, I like him. But yeah, it is becoming very hacky to just constantly joke about the same thing over and over and over again. Isn't that what was being said originally about Trump, where everyone's making jokes about Trump, right? That's why I'm not making jokes about Trump, because it's kind of hacky. Well, the fucking tables have turned, dude. Like, now it's hacky to make jokes against the wokes because everyone's doing it. Like, come up with new material at this point.
We don't use the word chink anymore. Well, maybe some of them do. You don't use the word oriental anymore. You don't use the word colored anymore. Is that, in a democratic world, people learn to treat other people with respect, communities, and live with it. So this pushback, I don't know how you frame it as anything other than.
But I think it's an outward vocalization of the time. I just went and saw Ricky Gervais at the Hollywood Bowl.
What a bore.
No, brilliant.
You loved it.
I loved it.
All right, go ahead.
Fucking brilliant.
All right.
Fucking brilliant. And he talked about kind of like this on stage. I think this new show is called Mortality. And he talked about, what we are appalled at or what we think is stupid is all about the time. And this is what I'm talking about, our cultural shift. We're not shifting it, it's shifting. He goes, like, listen, right now, everybody talks, the worst thing you can be is a racist. You can't, and it is, right?
That's just hilariously out of touch. No, the worst thing that you can be called is not a racist, not by any stretch of the imagination. Replace the letter C with the letter P in that word, and maybe you might have the ghost of an argument, but you really don't here now. Maybe in 2015, your argument might have had some weight, 2016, but certainly not anymore. I mean, I remember one of the main criticisms that people would have of the woke is that they would throw around the word racist around way too liberally, so much so to the point where it diluted the meaning of that word. And now whenever you would hear someone get called a racist, you wouldn't really think twice about it because that's the first thing that would come to your mind. And certainly, especially not nowadays, no, people are saying crazy, unhinged stuff, and they're being called racist all the time, and no one cares. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't have any power or any weight. No one cares if anybody is called a racist. Certainly not racist. So no, this argument that people care about being called a racist, no one cares. Like, who cares? You think Trump cares about being called a racist? You think any of these comedians care about being called a racist? No. Not in the slightest. It just doesn't have the same level of power as it did in 2015, and that's because the landscape has changed. And it's that changing landscape that I feel like Howie Mandel hasn't recognized or hasn't understood. I don't understand why he's making these 2015 arguments as if they're fresh and new and anybody would listen to them, have an epiphany about the cultural landscape nowadays. It's ridiculous.
Now, I mean, if that's probably the number one negative.
I don't think that's true. I think that maybe since he's written that show, the screw is turned. It doesn't seem to be the most negative thing at all. But we have a president who's a racist. And he's very popular.
He's not identified as one, though.
Well, how much digging do you have to do? Get me on a computer. I can do it in 2 clicks.
Yeah, like what a stupid point. He's not identified as one. Like, what does that mean? Can we only call people racist who identify themselves as ones? What does that mean? That means nothing. It's such a stupid trite point.
No, I know, but half the country doesn't agree with you.
So it's not the biggest problem, is it?
That is a great point by Marc Maron right there. That's a wonderful point right there. Because Howie Mandel's original claim is that the worst thing that you can be called is a racist. And this ties into the grander narrative that the woke should still be combated because they still have power, right? But then if in the next sentence, Howie Mandel says, okay, yes, everyone calls, or a lot of people call Donald Trump a racist, but half the country disagree with you. Then being called a racist must not be the worst thing in the world then, by definition, right? If being called a racist doesn't prevent you from becoming the most powerful person in the world, then how much power can it possibly have? And to that extent, do we really care about whatever power it does have? And so I think that's a wonderful point by Marc Maron, and he really did catch Howie Mandel right there, like in a logical, I don't want to say a logical trap, but like Howie Mandel just is logically flawed in his argument here, based on what he himself is admitting.
Yeah, my understanding of what he was saying was less about politics and where we are as a culture and society right now, and more about the art of comedy. And to him, it's not comedy just to say something shocking.
That's right. It's a workaround.
Yeah.
Be more creative.
Yeah.
Don't be a hack.
But you also are giving comedy a lot more power than I think it has in our society.
Yeah, like that's not true anymore. What are you talking about? If comedy had no power, then why would Donald Trump want to go on Joe Rogan? Why would JD Vance want to go on Theo Von's podcast? Why? Like, it's stupid. It's stupid. One of the big reasons why Trump won in 2024 was because he galvanized all these people from like the Rogansphere, the enlightened meatheads, as Marc Maron calls them on the Bad Friends podcast. Like, no, it did matter. It does matter. Comedy, the people who are some of the most popular spokespeople for the MAGA movement are comedians at this point. So it's like to say that comedy doesn't have a concerning level of power in terms of shaping public opinion or in terms of changing the direction of certain elections, I think it's silly at this point. If that weren't true, if comedy really did have that little power, then you wouldn't have seen all these crazy powerful people show up on these podcasts. So yeah, I mean that's it for that video. It just really surprised me how out of touch Howie Mandel really seemed to be. Sometimes when I hear these people talk about how concerning the issue of the woke is, right? How scary the woke are and all that stuff. Sometimes it really feels like you're traveling back in time to 2015 or 2016 because it's like, man, what world are you living in right now that you still think that some blue-haired college professor has any level of power over you? By what metric? What are you talking about? Like, certainly not cultural, certainly not actual like political capital. So yeah, it just seemed like a very out of touch. And again, I do have disagreements with Marc Maron on some things in terms of comedy. But generally speaking, I think he's on the money here. And also when he was on Andrew Santino's podcast, I think he also did a really good job. Unfortunately, only for Andrew Santino and Bobby Lee or whomever is in charge of the thumbnail and title to completely cook out to Joe Rogan's call and remove Marc Maron from the thumbnail and from the title. So that sucks.